Welcome back to Nighttime History. Tonight we will be exploring the ancient world of medieval beekeeping, where monks and villagers worked behind stone walls to harvest nature's golden treasure. Thank you for joining us. Sit back and relax as we dive deep into the gentle rhythms of medieval apiaries, where wax became candles and honey became both food and medicine. You find yourself standing in the cool morning air of a medieval monastery courtyard where the first light of dawn filters through heavy stone archways. Listen as the distant hum of thousands of bees creates a soft, constant melody that will accompany your work throughout the day. You are about to enter a world where every movement is deliberate, every task connected to the ancient dance between human and bee. Watch as you walk across worn cobblestones toward the monastery's apiary. Your footsteps echo softly against the high stone walls that protect this sacred space. The air carries the sweet scent of wildflowers and the earthy smell of old wood and straw. Before you stretch rows of dome-shaped hives, each one carefully crafted from woven willow branches and sealed with clay and cow dung. You approach the first hive and notice how different these medieval bee homes look from anything you might recognize today. These are called skeps, and you can see how each one has been woven with patient hands during the long winter months. The monks who tend this apiary spent countless hours by firelight, their fingers working strips of willow into tight basket-like domes. You run your hand along the smooth exterior, where layers of clay mixed with straw create a weatherproof seal. Listen to the gentle vibration that travels through the skep walls as thousands of worker bees move inside their dark home. Medieval beekeepers learn to read these sounds like a language. A healthy hive produces a steady, content humming. An agitated colony creates a higher, more urgent buzzing. You place your ear close to the woven surface and feel the warmth radiating from within, where the cluster of bees maintains a constant temperature even on cold mornings. You watch as Brother Thomas, the master beekeeper, emerges from the monastery carrying his tools. His brown robes are already stained with old wax and propolis, the sticky substance bees use to seal cracks in their home. In medieval monasteries, the role of beekeeper was often given to monks who showed particular patience and gentleness. These men would spend years learning to read the subtle signs that indicated when a hive was ready for harvest or when a colony might be preparing to swarm. Notice how Brother Thomas moves with slow, deliberate motions as he approaches the hives. Medieval beekeepers understood that sudden movements and loud noises would disturb their charges. You follow his example, keeping your steps light and your breathing steady. The morning ritual always begins the same way, with a careful inspection of each hive to check for signs of disease, damage, or the exciting possibility of a honey harvest. You observe as he kneels beside the first skep and gently lifts one edge to peer inside. Medieval hives were not opened frequently like modern ones. Instead, beekeepers relied on external signs to judge the health and productivity of their colonies. A heavy hive meant the bees had been successful in storing honey. Light weight suggested the colony might be struggling, or that the honey stores had been depleted. Watch as Brother Thomas selects a hive that shows all the signs of abundance. Bees stream in and out of the small entrance, their bodies heavy with pollen that creates tiny yellow clouds as they brush against the opening. The skep feels solid and weighty when lifted slightly from its base. Most importantly, the sound from within carries that deep, satisfied hum that experienced keepers recognize as the song of a successful colony. You see him reach for his smoker, a simple clay pot with holes punched in the sides. Medieval beekeepers discovered that smoke calmed bees, though they did not understand the scientific reasons behind this phenomenon. The smoke masks alarm pheromones and tricks the bees into thinking there might be a forest fire, causing them to fill their stomachs with honey in preparation for potential evacuation. Full bellies make bees less likely to sting. Listen as Brother Thomas strikes flint against steel to create the sparks that will ignite his tinder. The process requires patience, each strike producing tiny orange lights that may or may not catch in the dried moss and char cloth waiting in the clay vessel. Medieval fire-making was itself a meditative practice requiring steady hands and calm persistence. You hear the soft whoosh as the tinder finally catches, followed by the gentle crackling as small twigs begin to smoulder. You watch him add dried lavender and rosemary to the smoker, herbs that medieval beekeepers believed provided additional calming benefits. The aromatic smoke drifts upward in lazy spirals, carrying with it the peaceful scents of the monastery garden. Brother Thomas fans the smoker gently with a piece of leather, creating steady puffs of fragrant smoke that he directs toward the hive entrance. Notice how the bees' behavior changes as the smoke reaches them. The urgent activity at the hive entrance slows to a more relaxed pace. Guard bees that might normally investigate any disturbance become less vigilant. You can almost sense the collective calm that settles over the colony as the smoke does its ancient work. You observe the careful ritual that unfolds as Brother Thomas prepares to harvest honey from this productive hive. Medieval honey harvesting was not the precise scientific process that modern beekeepers employ. Instead, it required a more destructive approach that often meant sacrificing the entire colony. The honey and wax were so valuable, however, that this trade-off was considered worthwhile. Watch as he lifts the heavy skep completely off its base and carries it to a wooden table set up for processing. The base, called a hackle, remains behind with its circular groove that helped hold the skep in place. You notice how the bottom of the hive reveals the incredible architecture that bees create without any human guidance. Layers of wax comb hang in perfect parallel sheets, each one containing thousands of hexagonal cells. You see him reach for a long, thin knife that has been warmed by the fire. Medieval beekeepers learned that warm blades cut through wax and honey much more easily than cold ones. The knife slides through the comb with a soft, satisfying sound as golden honey begins to flow from the severed cells. You watch the thick liquid pour slowly into a waiting wooden bowl, its surface catching and reflecting the morning light like liquid amber. Listen to the gentle dripping sound as honey continues to flow from the cut comb. This sound would continue for hours as gravity pulled every precious drop from the waxy cells. Medieval households treasured honey not just for its sweetness, but for its remarkable ability to preserve other foods and for its medicinal properties. A successful hive could provide enough honey to sweeten a family's food for an entire year. You observe Brother Thomas as he carefully separates different qualities of honey. The lightest, clearest honey came from the newest comb at the top of the hive, where bees had stored nectar from the most recent flower sources. This premium honey was often reserved for the monastery's altar or for treating the sick. Darker honey from older comb still held great value, but was typically used for cooking and brewing. Notice how he handles each piece of comb with reverence, understanding that these geometric masterpieces represent thousands of hours of bee labour. Medieval people marvelled at the mathematical perfection of honeycomb, seeing in its hexagonal pattern evidence of divine inspiration. The wax itself was almost as valuable as the honey, essential for making the candles that provided light during long winter nights. You watch the methodical process of wax recovery as Brother Thomas places empty comb into a large copper pot suspended over the fire. Medieval monasteries often had specialized equipment for processing bee products, reflecting the importance of these materials in daily life. The pot sits at just the right height to receive steady heat without becoming too hot and damaging the valuable wax. Listen as the wax begins to melt with soft, bubbling sounds. The process fills the air with a sweet, clean scent that speaks of summer flowers and busy bee work. You observe how Brother Thomas stirs the melting mixture with a wooden paddle, breaking up larger pieces of comb to help them melt more evenly. Bits of pollen, propolis, and other hive debris float to the surface where they can be skimmed away. You notice the golden liquid wax as it is poured through a cloth strainer into waiting moulds. Medieval candle making required pure, clean wax to burn properly and produce steady light. The filtering process removed impurities that might cause candles to smoke or burn unevenly. Each mould would produce a candle that could burn for several hours, providing precious illumination for reading, prayer, or detailed handwork. Watch as the day progresses and more hives receive attention from the monastery's beekeepers. Not every hive is ready for harvest, and medieval beekeepers had to make careful decisions about which colonies to preserve for future years. A thriving apiary required maintaining breeding stock that could produce new swarms to replace harvested hives. You observe the signs that Brother Thomas looks for when evaluating hives for preservation. Strong colonies with young queens were always spared, even if they contained tempting stores of honey. These productive hives would continue working through the remaining warm months, potentially producing even more honey before winter arrived. They would also serve as the source of new colonies the following spring. Listen to the different sounds that emerge from various hives as you move through the apiary. Some produce the steady, contented hum of well-established colonies. Others buzz with the higher energy of newer swarms still building their first combs. Occasionally, you hear the more agitated sound of a hive that has lost its queen or faces some other challenge requiring the beekeeper's intervention. You notice how medieval beekeepers worked with natural swarming cycles rather than trying to control them as modern apiaries do. When a strong colony produced a new queen, roughly half the bees would leave with the old queen to establish a new home. Experienced keepers could often predict when swarming was likely to occur and would prepare empty skeps to capture these valuable new colonies. Let us stop here for a moment and take a breath in this peaceful medieval apiary. If you are enjoying this gentle journey through nighttime history, we invite you to join our community of nighttime travelers by subscribing and turning on notifications to support our channel. A like on this video helps us continue bringing you these relaxing historical escapes. Let us know in the comments where you are settling in to sleep tonight and what time it is in your corner of the world. You find yourself returning to the rhythmic work of honey processing as afternoon light filters through the monastery walls. The patient extraction continues as gravity slowly pulls golden sweetness from countless wax cells. Medieval beekeepers understood that rushing this process would waste precious honey that might be trapped in hastily handled comb. Watch as Brother Thomas demonstrates the careful art of comb cutting that maximizes honey recovery while preserving as much usable wax as possible. His experienced hands know exactly where to make each cut to allow honey to flow freely while keeping the structural integrity of larger pieces intact. This skill came only through years of practice and observation. You observe the monastery's apprentice beekeepers as they learn these ancient techniques through patient repetition. Young monks would spend entire seasons simply watching and assisting before being trusted to handle valuable hives independently. The knowledge passed down through generations of monastery beekeepers included not just practical techniques, but also the deeper wisdom of working in harmony with natural cycles. Listen to the soft conversations between master and student as they work side by side in the apiary. Medieval monastic education emphasized learning through doing rather than abstract study. The apprentice beekeepers absorbed lessons about bee behavior, seasonal timing, and product processing through direct experience, guided by their teachers' gentle corrections and explanations. You notice how the monastery's beekeeping operation integrates with other aspects of monastic life. The timing of honey harvests coincided with other agricultural activities that required additional sweetening for food preservation. Wax production peaked just before the season, when longer nights demanded more candles for evening prayers and manuscript copying. Watch as the day's harvest is carefully inventoried and stored in the monastery's dedicated honey house. Medieval religious communities maintained detailed records of their beekeeping operations, tracking which hives produced the most honey and when optimal harvesting times occurred. These records helped future generations of beekeepers make better decisions about timing and techniques. You observe the specialized storage vessels used to preserve honey and wax for long-term use. Large ceramic crocks sealed with wax-coated cloth covers protected honey from moisture and contamination. Blocks of purified wax were wrapped in linen and stored in cool, dry chambers, where they would remain stable for years until needed for candle making or other purposes. Notice how the monastery's beekeeping activities connected the religious community to the broader medieval economy. Surplus honey and wax were often traded with neighbouring villages for goods the monastery could not produce itself. High-quality beeswax commanded premium prices from wealthy households and other religious institutions that demanded the finest candles for their ceremonies. Listen as evening approaches and the day's intensive work begins to wind down. The constant background hum of bee activity gradually decreases as forager bees return to their hives for the night. The apiary takes on a more peaceful atmosphere as both bees and humans prepare for rest after a day of productive labour. You watch Brother Thomas make his final inspection rounds, checking that processed honey and wax are properly covered and stored. Medieval beekeepers learned to be vigilant about protecting their valuable products from moisture, pests, and other threats that could ruin hours of careful work. Each container is sealed, each workspace cleaned and organized for the next day's activities. The ancient rhythm of medieval beekeeping continues its eternal cycle behind these monastery walls, where patient hands work in harmony with nature's most industrious creatures to harvest sweetness and light from summer's abundance. You find yourself drawn deeper into the evening routines that sustained medieval apiaries through changing seasons. Watch as the monastery's beekeepers begin preparing their colonies for the harsh months ahead. The late summer air carries a different quality now, cooler and tinged with the first hints of autumn's approach. You can sense how both bees and their human partners instinctively respond to these subtle seasonal signals. Listen as Brother Thomas explains the critical timing of winter preparations to his apprentices. Medieval beekeepers understood that colonies left unprepared would never survive the long months when no flowers bloomed and temperatures dropped below freezing. You observe him examining each remaining hive with extra care, assessing which colonies have sufficient honey stores to sustain themselves through winter's scarcity. You notice how he gently lifts each skep to gauge its weight. A hive heavy with honey stores promises survival, while a lighter colony requires immediate intervention. Medieval beekeepers would sometimes combine weaker colonies with stronger ones, uniting their populations to create a single robust community capable of maintaining the warmth necessary for winter survival. This process required careful judgment about which queens to preserve and how to merge populations without triggering warfare between different bee families. Watch as the beekeepers begin the delicate work of hive insulation. Bundles of straw are carefully arranged around each skep, creating protective barriers against winter winds. You see how they leave small gaps to ensure adequate ventilation while preventing drafts that might chill the cluster of bees huddled inside their wax city. Medieval beekeepers learned through careful observation that completely sealing hives led to dangerous moisture buildup that could kill entire colonies. You observe the apprentice monks as they gather materials for these winter preparations. Dried grasses from the monastery meadows are bundled and tied with hemp rope. Clay mixed with chopped straw creates a weatherproof coating that can be applied to any cracks or weak spots in hive construction. Every material serves a specific purpose in maintaining the delicate environmental balance that keeps bee colonies alive through months of cold weather. Notice how the positioning of hives within the apiary reflects centuries of accumulated wisdom about winter survival. Skeps are arranged to take advantage of southern exposure that will capture precious winter sunlight while remaining protected from harsh northern winds by the monastery's stone walls. Medieval beekeepers understood that even small differences in microclimate could determine whether colonies thrived or perished. Listen to the quiet sounds of bees reducing their activity as shorter days trigger instinctive preparations for winter dormancy. The frantic pace of summer foraging gives way to a more subdued rhythm focused on conservation rather than expansion. You can hear how the collective hum from the apiary becomes deeper and more intermittent as colonies settle into their cold weather routines. You watch Brother Thomas demonstrate the art of entrance reduction, partially blocking hive openings with carefully shaped pieces of wood or clay. Medieval beekeepers discovered that smaller entrances helped colonies maintain interior warmth while still allowing necessary ventilation. The reduced openings also made it easier for guard bees to protect their homes from mice and other creatures seeking warm winter shelter. Observe how the monastery's beekeeping activities integrate with other seasonal preparations throughout the religious community. The timing of honey harvesting coordinates with brewing activities that transform surplus honey into mead for winter celebrations. Wax processing aligns with candle-making schedules that must produce enough illumination to last through the long, dark months ahead. You notice the careful attention given to recording and preserving beekeeping knowledge for future generations. Medieval monasteries maintained detailed chronicles of successful techniques, optimal timing for various activities, and observations about bee behavior under different conditions. These written records supplemented the oral traditions passed down from master to apprentice, creating a comprehensive knowledge base that improved over generations. Watch as the day's work transitions into evening meal preparation in the monastery kitchen. Honey, harvested from the apiary, sweetens bread, flavors roasted vegetables, and creates medicinal preparations that will help the monastic community maintain health through winter's challenges. You observe how fresh honeycomb is carefully portioned, with the finest pieces reserved for feast days and special religious observances. You see kitchen brothers incorporating beeswax into food preservation techniques that extend the storage life of autumn harvests. Cheese wheels are sealed with thin layers of melted wax that prevent spoilage while maintaining proper aging conditions. Fruit preserves are topped with wax seals that create airtight barriers against contamination. These techniques allow the monastery to maintain varied nutrition throughout months when fresh foods are unavailable. Listen as the evening meal unfolds with quiet conversations about the day's beekeeping activities. Experienced brothers share observations about colony behaviour, discuss plans for next season's hive management, and offer guidance to newer members of the beekeeping team. These informal discussions serve as continuing education that supplements formal training in apiary techniques. You observe how honey and wax products connect the monastery to the broader medieval community through trade relationships and charitable activities. Surplus honey is often distributed to poor families in nearby villages, providing essential nutrition for children and elderly community members who might otherwise struggle through winter months. High-quality beeswax candles are gifted to other religious institutions, strengthening bonds between monastic communities across the region. Notice how the monastery's apiary reflects broader medieval attitudes about humanity's relationship with the natural world. Beekeeping represents a partnership between human intelligence and natural instinct, where success depends on understanding and working with bee behaviour rather than attempting to dominate or control it. This philosophy extends throughout monastic agricultural practices that emphasize sustainable harmony with natural cycles. Watch as twilight settles over the monastery courtyard and the day's intensive beekeeping activities draw to a peaceful close. The apiary takes on an almost magical quality in the fading light, with neat rows of straw-wrapped hives looking like small cottages in a miniature village. You can sense the tens of thousands of bees settling into their nighttime routines within these protective shelters. You observe Brother Thomas making his final evening inspection, moving quietly among the hives with a small lantern to check that all winter preparations are properly secured. Medieval beekeepers understood that vigilant attention to detail during these transition periods could mean the difference between thriving colonies and devastating losses. Each loose piece of straw is adjusted, every gap in the protective covering is sealed. Listen to the subtle sounds that indicate healthy hive activity as darkness falls. Well-prepared colonies produce a gentle, intermittent humming that speaks of contentment and security. You learn to distinguish these peaceful sounds from the more agitated buzzing that might indicate problems requiring immediate attention. Medieval beekeepers developed extraordinary sensitivity to these auditory cues that guided their nighttime assessments. You notice how the monastery's evening prayer schedule accommodates the rhythms of beekeeping work. The final hive inspections are timed to conclude before compline, allowing the beekeeping brothers to join their community for the last religious observance of the day. This integration of practical work with spiritual practice exemplifies the medieval monastic ideal of finding sacred meaning in everyday labour. Watch as the tools and equipment used throughout the day are cleaned and properly stored for future use. Wooden bowls that held honey are scraped clean and washed with warm water. Knives used for cutting comb are carefully dried and oiled to prevent rust. The clay smoker is emptied of ashes and stored in a dry location where it will remain ready for the next day's activities. You observe the careful documentation process that concludes each day's beekeeping work. Medieval monasteries maintain detailed records of hive productivity, harvesting dates, and observations about colony health. These written chronicles served both practical purposes for future planning and historical purposes for preserving knowledge across generations. Brother Thomas makes careful notes about which hives were processed, quantities of honey and wax recovered, and observations about overall apiary conditions. Notice how the monastery's beekeeping operation reflects the broader medieval economy's reliance on seasonal rhythms and natural cycles. Unlike modern industrial agriculture that attempts to maintain constant production year-round, medieval beekeeping worked within natural limitations and opportunities. Success required patience, careful observation, and the wisdom to work with rather than against natural processes. Listen as the sounds of the monastery settle into nighttime quietude. The busy activity of daylight hours gives way to peaceful sounds of evening rest. Occasional footsteps echo softly in stone corridors as brothers move to their individual cells for private prayer and sleep. The apiary itself becomes almost silent except for the gentle, intermittent humming of well-tended bee colonies preparing for their own period of rest. You watch the last light fade from the monastery windows as candles made from the apiary's beeswax begin to illuminate evening activities. These flames represent the culmination of months of patient beekeeping work, from early spring hive inspections through summer honey harvests to the wax processing that created these sources of light. Each candle embodies the remarkable transformation of flower nectar into illumination through the combined efforts of bees and their human partners. Observe how the monastery's beekeeping traditions connect present activities to centuries of accumulated wisdom while also adapting to current conditions and needs. Medieval beekeepers understood that while fundamental principles remained constant, successful practice required flexibility and responsiveness to changing circumstances. Weather patterns, flower availability, and colony behaviour all varied from year to year, demanding constant learning and adjustment. You notice the deep satisfaction visible in Brother Thomas as he concludes another successful day of beekeeping work. Medieval monastics found spiritual meaning in the patient, repetitive tasks required for successful apiary management. The careful attention to detail, the gentle handling of living creatures, and the transformation of natural materials into useful products all served as forms of prayer and meditation that connected daily work to deeper spiritual purposes. Watch as the monastery settles into its nighttime rhythm with the knowledge that winter preparations are well underway. The beekeeping community can rest with confidence that their colonies are properly prepared for the challenging months ahead. Adequate honey stores, proper insulation, and careful monitoring have created the best possible conditions for colony survival through winter's trials. You observe the quiet contentment that pervades the monastery as evening activities wind down. The day's beekeeping work has contributed to the community's physical needs through honey for nutrition and wax for illumination. More importantly, the patient, careful work has provided opportunities for spiritual reflection and growth that strengthen the bonds between community members and deepen their connection to the natural world. Listen as the great silence of monastic night begins to descend over the apiary and surrounding buildings. This peaceful quiet allows both human and bee communities to rest and restore themselves for tomorrow's activities. The rhythm of medieval beekeeping continues its ancient cycle, marked by seasonal changes and daily routines that have sustained both bees and their human partners for countless generations. The monastery's beekeeping operation represents one small example of the countless ways medieval communities developed sustainable relationships with the natural world. Through patient observation, accumulated wisdom, and respectful partnership with other living creatures, medieval beekeepers created systems that provided for human needs while supporting the health and prosperity of bee populations. You find yourself filled with appreciation for the quiet dedication and accumulated wisdom that made medieval beekeeping possible. Behind monastery walls, generations of patient monks developed and refined techniques that allowed human and bee communities to thrive together. Their legacy continues in the peaceful hum of well-tended hives and the golden glow of beeswax candles that illuminate the darkness with nature's transformed gift. Thank you if you enjoyed our work and are still awake. Check out our other medieval content, and if you've fallen asleep, please relax and enjoy the campfire.